Hello? It looks like you're trying to be welcomed to
Distance learning.
Hello. We're going to go into localized adjustments a little bit today, which will be fun. Guaranteed. Not actually guaranteed. That will be super helpful and make your life a lot better in any number of ways. But the big way that will make your life better is that we will use the same techniques next week or the week after or something to do masking without having to do erasure, because erasure is it's a pain. I'm sorry you had to do it. So a couple of reminders, reminder on the layer names. I doubtless just reminded you about that in the live section. But for those of you who may have missed it, layer names, do them. And yeah, that's it. So at this point, we would usually be using the Wacom tablets. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the majesty that is the Wacom tablet, let me just show you what you're missing out on, because that's not a dick move. So they're basically a I don't know, cookies, garbage. A sort of pen. I told you I don't give a shit about your cookies. Pen thing that you use instead of a mouse, and they are pressure sensitive, and you can have them be controlled by like the angle you're holding them at, all this shit. They're just a lot easier to use, right? In the same way that it's easier to sign your name with a pen than it is to sign your name with a brick, something like that. It's a lot easier to use the pen tool than it is to use the mouse, or certainly than it is to use the trackpad. Trackpad is terrible. So if you have a laptop that just has a trackpad, I would super recommend that you go buy a mouse. They are like $5 on Amazon.com. And although make sure if you have a new laptop that has a weird USB-C, like figure some shit out. If you can, spring for a Wacom. They're cool. They make cheaper ones. The bamboo line, like, doesn't have to be expensive. Doesn't have to be big. Just has to have a pen. We do not use like half of the qualities that it has. Illustrators use them, and we are not at the moment illustrators. So the thing that we will be doing with that, you can still do no matter what your input device is. So let's go ahead and take a look at drawing some lines, doing a little brushwork in Photoshop. I guess it'll be another clip. So we're going to go through a little bit on brushwork. Go ahead and open up the Photoshops. Awesome. So open up Photoshop. Let's make a new layer or a new document. File, new. And we're going to call it last name, first name, pen exercise. I guess we should put a PH172 in there, right? Sure, I don't know. There, oh, geez. Yeah, how about that? So the default size, 1080 by 720. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because my screen is fairly high resolution, and I don't want you guys to be straining your eyes trying to look at it. Background content's transparent, sure. Resolution 72. Working color profile. You know, this super doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm changing it. Cool. Okay, so here is my document. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer. I'm going to grab my paint bucket, G on the keyboard, grab my default colors, D on the keyboard, X on the keyboard, so now I have white for my foreground. Paint bucket that in, why did nothing happen? For my paint bucket is set to 50% opacity. That is stupid. There we go. So with that in there, I'm going to drag that down to the bottom and call it white background. And I'm going to rename this first one pen drawing layer. So pen is not the right word, brush. There. So F on the keyboard to go full screen. And yeah, it's kind of a long rectangle. Clear, I don't need a proportion. Okay. So here is our, wow, that is really annoying. Scrubby zoom. Whew. I'm getting dizzy from me doing that. Here's our rectangle. It is white. We are on the transparent layer. So now that we've done that, which took like 15 minutes, I can't believe it, hit D on the keyboard to get our default black ink. And now we're going to go and grab our brush, which we have not necessarily used before. So the brush, thankfully, is B for brush on the keyboard. Super straightforward. And once I've got the brush, you'll notice that now I have this big round, whoa, thing going on there. Command Z to undo. And man, you know, it just wants to go exactly not the right size. That seems good. Let's keep that, shall we, friends? That big circle that you see there is the outline of my brush, right? So that's exciting. Seeing that outline is helpful because it tells us how big our brush is before we actually do anything with it. If you do not see that, there are a couple of reasons. One, if you do not see it, it may be because you have the caps lock key on. This took me approximately 3 hours to figure out the first time it happened, and I was not happy. So caps lock will get rid of your brush and give you that stupid little cross. Other things that will do that. If your brush is really, really, really big, right? Like so big that it's not fitting on your screen, that will also do it. So if you have that cross, go up and make sure up here at the top in our contextual menu for the brush that your brush is not gigantic. If you drag it down to a size like 130 pixels, that should be fine. Right, that's a set number of pixels, so depending on how big your document is, how zoomed in you are, that's going to determine whether or not it fits on the screen. If you have a gigantic document, you could still have a gigantic brush and it would still fit. Likewise, if you have a teeny tiny document, you could have a medium-sized brush and it would be off the edges of the page. But you can scroll around and see. The other way to do that, to control brush size, is a little bit easier, is with the square brackets on the keyboard. So those are the keys. They are just above the return key and a little bit to your left. They look like parentheses that are squared. Call them square brackets. Right above them are the curly braces, different thing. And they will make your brush bigger or smaller depending on which one you hit. Those are incredibly, incredibly useful. So put that in your brain somewhere. So that's another reason. If your thing is too big, it won't fit. If your thing is too small, same thing. So you'll notice it's a teeny tinier little crosshairs, but it's also a crosshairs. So too big, too small, or caps lock. Third option, or fourth option, I don't know, is preferences and cursors. So you should go here anyway, just to see what's going on. Painting cursors, normal brush tip, full-size brush tip, precise, and standard. Standard, if I catch you using standard, you will fail the class. Just like, done. Like, that's just no. Unless you're like being like goofy and retro in a video or something, like, no. Precise is going to give you that cross. So if you have that, check and see that you are set to normal brush tip rather than precise. So yeah, other cursors over here, setting them to precise is good because again, standard, stupid. So go into Preferences, go to your cursors, and make sure that you have a normal brush tip and your other cursors are precise, and you can hit OK. So those are the three things that could cause you to have a cursor that looks like that instead of our lovely brush cursor. So check that, make sure you have the right one. Okay, now that we have a brush on here, I'm going to make it, it's around 200. I can see that up there. And I'm just going to draw a line. Look at that. Huh. So that's a line. Good job. So the variables that we have with our brush are size, which we were just playing with. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo, to make it smaller. There we go. There's a smaller one. That's pretty straightforward. In addition to size, there is also text blowing up my phone. There's also hardness. Hardness is how fuzzy the edge is, right? So very hard brush is like drawing with a magic marker. Very soft brush is like drawing with an airbrush. So let's go ahead. I'm going to draw that same line that I was just drawing. And then I'm going to come back up here to the top, click on that, and take the hardness and drag it all the way down to 0. So brush tip, same size, but now that edge is soft rather than hard. Most of the time we're going to be wanting to use a soft edge brush because it's going to make our layer masking less noticeable. A little bit sort of fuzziness helps it blend when we're doing things like bringing in a curves layer, doing sort of exposure adjustment, stuff like that. If you're doing something where you want to have a very abrupt edge, and we'll actually do something like that later this class with black and white, then you will want to use a harder edged brush. So being able to draw a hard edge brush, being able to draw a soft edge brush, those are two very important things. The other variables that we have up here are opacity and flow. Again, these are up here in the contextual menu. So opacity is, if I set that to 50, let's say, or thereabouts, and I'm going to click and go back and forth. So no matter how much I scribble in here, all I'm ever going to get is 50% of whatever my solid color is. So this is 50% of black until I let up on my mouse and do it again, then it's another 50%, another 50%, and so on. So it does sort of like a solid mask or a solid painting of one color. So scribble as much as you want, nothing changes until you mouse up and mouse back down. I'm going to go ahead and clear these out by selecting all, Command A, and then delete on the keyboard. Once I've deleted on the keyboard, I can deselect by hitting Command D for deselect. Okay, so I've got my brush, and I'm going to do that line again with the 50% opacity, scribble back and forth. Now I'm going to go back up here, pull it up to 100, or I'm going to put it to 1. That's not what I want. Perfect. Now I'm going to go to flow, and I'm going to set my flow to something really low. Let's set it to 12. Okay. So opacity, I set it to 50. I scribbled back and forth, and it stayed at that 50% gray. Flow, right, I'm going to scroll back and forth, and it gets black pretty fast. Right? I'm going to set it even lower. I'm going to set it down here to 3. And even at 3, eventually it gets to solid black. So flow, right, it's like with an airbrush, right? It's like setting out a soft, fairly light layer of paint, but if I go back and forth and back and forth, it builds up slowly to a solid coat. When we're doing masking, using flow is super, super helpful, right? Because we can gradually bring in whatever adjustment we're trying to mask in. These words will make more sense later. So it's important that you know how to set your flow, right? It's important that you know the difference between flow and opacity. And then it's important that you know how to control your brush size and also that you can control your brush hardness. The last thing that we're going to look at here, select all, delete, Command D to deselect, is up here again in that brush contextual menu. There's a little brush folder thing. And if I click on that, we get this exciting brush settings panel. Now, if you're working with a Wacom, this is a good place to go because it will allow you to set, where is it, transfer, click, transfer dynamics, and you can say, all right, as I use my Wacom pressure sensitive tablet, the harder I push down, the more opacity and flow or whatever I'm going to get. And so you can use your pen pressure as a way to regulate how much paint you lay down. That's super, super useful. If you don't have a Wacom, then don't even worry about this. So forget about it. So that's not super, super important. The other thing that's on here is something to avoid, and that is shape dynamics. Shape dynamics, when you're using a Wacom, allows you to push down and get a bigger brush size and push down lightly and get a smaller brush size. I have no use for that. So those things are there. I'm not going to quiz you on them, but if you have a Wacom, play around with them. Don't use shape dynamics. Do use transfer dynamics. Also here is brush tip shape, where you can go down a freaking rabbit hole of being like, look, I made my brush a bunch of, like, you know, Canadian maple leaves, right? Like, do you want that? No, don't do that. Don't set your brush to freaking Canadian maple leaves, because you will forget how you did it and you will be drawing Canadian maple leaves for the rest of your life. Okay. The last thing that, get that big thing up there. The last thing to look at on here is spacing. Right, so all this other stuff we didn't worry about, but let's go to brush tip shape and come down here to spacing, just so that we can see what it does. So spacing goes from having your brush be a continuous brush stroke to a bunch of dots. Why would you want a bunch of dots? I don't know, but some people set their brush to that, and then their masks look like garbage. So with this, we want to keep the spacing pretty low. I would say under 15. You're really going to notice this more if you have your hardness turned all the way up. So if I have my hardness set to 100% and my spacing is too high, let me get my flow back to 100%. Then I get what I describe as a caterpillar / turd shape, right? It's like bloop, 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 bloop. You don't want that. You will get points off for that, and it is a bad idea. So that is the only thing in this brush settings thing that you need to worry about. You can just set it relatively low and set it and forget it. Okay, cool. So those are the brush things. You will get a quiz on them next week. Size, hardness, flow versus opacity, and then spacing. Size, hardness, flow versus opacity, spacing. Make sure you know how to do those. Make sure you can draw a line with different hardnesses, different flows, different opacities, whatever. Make sure that you know where to control your spacing, and you will do great in the quiz. Okay, that is our first clip. Next up, we are, well, first, let's draw those lines. Okay, sorry, my bad. So let's draw a hard line like that. Let's draw a line with a low hardness. You can also control that here, like that. And then let's draw a line with a low flow where it sort of fades in by scribbling back and forth. There. So if you can draw that, you're good. Take that, screenshot it, put it on the Padlet, and your life will be awesome. And we will now go on to the next clip talking about black and white.